Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, March 25th, and I've got more data for you to show you. I've got a data update for today from Seattle. Again, it looks like the COVID-19 epidemic is playing out very differently in different areas. And so, of course, I've been tracing it in Washington State, especially King and Snohomish Counties. That's the perspective I want to give you the data from for today. This is a special Tolkien Day edition because March 25th is a special day for multiple reasons, including that it's very special in The Lord of the Rings. But I will get to that after we talk about the data. So today's conclusions are the data is taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that means the data is looking better as a whole for the Washington State area. This is actually good news. Now remember, we're going to have 3 kinds of data. We're going to have case data, hospitalizations, and mortality. Each of these has its strengths and weaknesses, and you can't look at any of them by itself. Also, the time curve of this virus takes weeks rather than days, so we should never be looking at a single data point. So instead, I want to show you why cases and mortality are looking like they are steps forward. Hospitalizations looks like 1 step back, but actually looking at it a little bit closer, that fits into a context in which we appear to be past the middle of the first wave of COVID-19 in the Washington State area. Now, on a previous video, I showed this graph, and this is a graph of South Korea's cases organized by new cases by day. The point I made earlier was that you shouldn't look at just one data point. If one data point fluctuates up or down, well, you don't know what that means. This virus plays out on a time scale of weeks. So you have to look at multiple days before you begin to see how the data plays out. What's important is that you have this wave of the virus that lasts 2 to 3 weeks when you're getting new cases day by day. And so I want to take this wave of cases and say, now in King and Snohomish County, we are ramping up the case testing, we are confirming more cases, and each day we seem to be getting more and more cases coming in. What is this meaning? What do we get from these new cases? And so what I want to do is I want to look at it not as total cumulative cases, but I want to say each day how many new cases are we reporting in both King and Snohomish County. King is the blue line, Snohomish is the orange line. The first thing you might see, definitely cases are going up. If you look, this graph goes back a couple of weeks to the 8th of March, and you can see the cases were lower, and now they are higher. We're catching more cases. We're confirming that there's more of this around. That's exactly what we expected with the epidemic. But I want you to compare the shape of it, because if you look at the past couple of days, on the whole, even though you have one fluctuation up, that's the biggest fluctuation up that we've seen for the orange Snohomish County line, that does not fit with the trend of the past 4 days. The past 4 days are trending down. We're getting fewer and fewer new cases in both King and Snohomish counties on average. And so I would say that this case data actually looks to be solid enough that maybe we can start to estimate the size of this wave. The South Korea wave, like we had right here, was about 3 weeks. And if you estimate where we are in this wave, you can sort of imagine, with noisy data and lots of fluctuations in the data points, right? You can sort of imagine that we are located about where the data lines up like this, like we're on week 2, we're ending week 2 of the 3-week wave of new cases that we see for this wave of the coronavirus. This is really good because we need to follow South Korea's example, and it looks like, tentatively speaking, it looks like we are. And this would say that we have probably another week left in this wave. Again, wave of new cases. The deaths continue after the wave of new cases is finished because those people are still in the hospital and still in the system. Speaking of hospitalizations, we don't have that for King County, remember, but we do have it for Snohomish. And I've been watching that. When I showed this previously, I showed it on the 20th of March data, and we had data that had not gone down, but they were still going up by 1 each day. And I said that was good. It looks like there was an elbow where it wasn't exponentially increasing, right? Well, look what happened after we reported that. Since I've last talked about the data has actually gone down. And it went down more significantly than I expected. And then it rebounded and it went back up pretty significantly, where it's back where it was before. But remember what I was saying, I was hoping the data would go down from here. The data has gone down. It's just gone way down and then kind of way up again. But overall, the data is down. We know from the Everett Herald article that ran on Sunday, we know the exact number of ICU beds that were in Everett on Sunday. And Snohomish County was actually gearing up to have more capacity for ICU beds. Again, this is a strain. 60 patients in the hospital are taking up beds that other people need. But it's a strain that the system was handling 5 days ago, and if anything, it's gotten slightly better since then. So again, promising data from the hospitalizations, and also a reminder not to look at the daily data, but to look at the weekly data. Hospitalizations in Snohomish County are flat. And then we want to look at the slope of the mortality line. We want to make sure that the mortality line slope that we had for King and Snohomish County continues. If you look at the last 4 or 5 points on the yellow data line, which is King and Snohomish Counties, you can see that it has continued. There were some days where the deaths were way down. There was one day where there was only 1 death reported. There are some days where it was way up. There was one day where there was like 15 or 16 deaths reported total. But those fluctuate out, and those go up and down, and at the end of the day, you get a relatively flat line that I can even convince myself that it might be trending down a little bit, which is what we want. This is cumulative. It's going to always trend up. We can hope that it will flatten completely at some point. By the way, the slope of this line means that the mortality in King and Snohomish counties together is doubling roughly every week, every 7 days. And again, that is South Korea level rates of doubling at this point. It looks like King and Snohomish County are doing okay for now. Now, life's heterogeneous and complex. There could be a surge of patients coming. But every day without a surge means there wasn't a surge yesterday. And so we need to still be vigilant and still be prepared and be distancing for a little while longer. But if we have evidence that we have another week in this wave, we can start to say to ourselves, what do we do if this trend continues? Again, there's really another week or two at least of current practices being the best practices. But there's hope that we won't have to do this forever. There's all sorts of complexities to loosening up the restrictions, and we'll have to do it much more slowly than we impose them. And yet, I think that we'll be able to talk about them soon. Not yet. The other thing to notice is that slope of the gray line, which you remember is the U.S., is continuing to be at the faster rate. That is closer to a doubling rate of every 3 to 4 days of cases rather than every week. So that's twice as fast a doubling, and that is getting into the scary exponential, possibly overloading critical care. This is also for the entire U.S. It's even higher in places like New York and Louisiana. So if you're a praying type, pray for those states. If you're a scientific type, look for solutions in communicating that the science says we need to socially distance to those states, and we also need to be patient. If you're both, do both. Now I want to explain why I wanted to rush and get this out today, because it is Tolkien Day, March 25th, and it's actually a good day for thinking about what does Lord of the Rings have to do with all this. Now, I'm not trying to shoehorn this in. If you're not really into this, this is where we move from the results section of the paper to the conclusions interpretation, Lord of the Rings interpretation section of the paper. So feel free to turn me off right now if you're not into this. If you're into Tolkien, be warned that I am going to talk about the books. The books are pure Tolkien, and the movies have been filtered through a particular lens of interpretation themselves. So if you think about the books, there are several ways that magic in the books allows you to get a look at the world that you couldn't get by yourself. Magic plays a sort of scientific role in some ways, in which you're getting skio knowledge about the world itself. And so when we're testing, we're looking through a lens at the world, a scientific lens. Viral testing is looking through a lens like when Frodo and Sam looked through the mirror of Galadriel. And of course, the mirror of Galadriel shows the present and the future as well. With science, we can try to predict those, but it's also hard to interpret, kind of like the mirror of Galadriel. Here's a quote from the book, and it's important that Tolkien said this kind of looking at the world and trying to figure out where it's going, is a good thing that you need to do, but there are downsides to it. When Galadriel shows Frodo the mirror, he is a little scared of it. He says, "Do you advise me to look?" Galadriel says, "No, I do not counsel you one way or the other. I am not a counselor. You may learn something, and whether what you see be fair or evil, that may be profitable, and yet it may not. Seeing is both good and perilous." Now think about that. Taking a scientific test can be both good and stress-inducing. Knowing your medical information can be good for you, but it can be bad if the insurance company decides to see it and decides to up your rates as a result. There is a good and perilous side to viral testing as well, especially if you are basing your conclusions on a single day of data or too small of a slice of data rather than a whole week of data trend. And Galadriel finishes, "Yet I think, Frodo, that you have courage and wisdom enough for the venture, or I would not have brought you here. Do as you will." Frodo has a choice for what he looks at and how he interprets it after the fact. And that's true for science as well as for the magical mirror of Galadriel. If you think about the devices that allow you to do scientific type things in Lord of the Rings, you probably immediately think of the Palantir, their version of the cell phones. Definitely much less widespread, but serving a similar function. And when you're looking at all this complex information, when you're looking through a Palantir or looking at your cell phone at this data, you've got to filter it. And you've got to choose which voices you listen to. The really interesting thing to me about the Palantir, this comes through in the movie a little bit, but it's really clear in the book, Palantirs cannot lie, but they can filter. They cannot show you something that is untrue, but they can show you a part of the truth and not show you the other part. There's three different ways that this happens. It actually turns out that the Palantir is used to mislead someone multiple times, and it's used for evil and for good. Sauron tries to mislead Aragorn by showing him the strength of his armies in the Palantir. But if you look at it, actually the good guys actually use the Palantir to mislead Sauron. Because, again, you see what you see, and what you see is true. But if you only see part of the truth, how you deal with that, you have to remember what you don't know. One thing that we don't know right now, how many people are already infected with the virus and have already developed antibodies? We don't know for sure anything right now, and so we can't hang our hat on any of this. But I can say there's a reason for some hope that part of this might not be as bad as some of the worst case estimates if that number is higher than we think. We've been surprised, probably more negatively surprised than positively surprised so far with this. Another positive surprise, the age curve, the fact that children don't seem to die from this. They can possibly get sick. And if you're young, you can possibly get really sick as well. But the mortality curve, at least we don't have to worry about our children dying from this. We have plenty to worry about, and there's lots of ways in which this can compound. And so I don't want to minimize any of this, but I do want to say if you are worried about what you don't know, realize that there's good things out there as well. And don't let your phone be like a Palantir that is focused in, honed in on the wrong kind of things all the time, or on one kind of thing, even if it's true. But the story I most want to tell you about is Cirith Ungol, which is the tower right after the big spider Ungoliant happens. By the way, there's going to be a few spoilers here, so but I probably expect that everyone who's spoiler phobic about Lord of the Rings hopefully has turned this off already by now. So I'm going to count that you know what Cirith Ungol is. It's what happened in Return of the King when Frodo was captured and after being stung by Shelob. Sam, of course, is outside the tower. This actually plays out a little bit different in the book than in the movie. And in fact, the book is one of my very favorite scenes. I understand why it's not very cinematic, but I think it's very meaningful. Sam does not even know if Frodo is dead or alive. In fact, it's a bit heroic that he's even looking for Frodo, considering that all of his chances tell him that his good friend is dead. But Sam does eventually save Frodo. But I want to say, rather than who saves Frodo at the Tower of Cirith Ungol, what saves Frodo at the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Okay? And let me explain what I said by reading the passage that we go through. Sam is inside the tower, but he can't find Frodo anywhere. In fact, he shows up at the tower, and the orcs have already mostly all killed each other by the self-destructive nature of evil. But Sam can't find Frodo anywhere. The tower seems to be deserted. At last, weary and feeling finally defeated, he sat on a step below the level of the passage floor and bowed his head into his hands. It was quiet, horribly quiet. He felt the darkness cover him like a tide. And then, softly, to his own surprise, there at the vain end of his long journey and his grief, moved by what thought in his heart he could not tell, Sam began to sing. This is what saves Frodo. Sam's voice sounded thin and quavering in the cold, dark tower. He murmured old childish tunes out of the Shire, snatches of Mr. Bilbo's rhymes that came into his mind like fleeting glimpses of the country of his home. And then suddenly new strength rose in him, and his voice rang out, while words of his own came unbidden to fit the simple tune. Sam is being a poet, creating with words, much like Tolkien himself created with words. Here's the poem itself. I'm going to skip to the end. Beyond all towers strong and high, beyond all mountains steep, above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. Because he knows that the sun and stars endure, Sam is saying, I will not say the day is done. This is a song of hope. He continues. He actually goes back and repeats, beyond all towers strong and high, he began again. And then he stopped short. He thought that he had heard a faint voice answering him. Now a door was being opened quietly in the passage above. The hinges creaked. Sam crouched down listening. And what happens is an orc comes out that has been guarding Frodo in a secret room that Sam could not find. The voice that answered him was Frodo singing along to the same old tune, not the new words that Sam made. Sam had the freedom to compose new words, but the tune was old. It's also important to note, how did Tolkien say that his universe was created? Beginning of the Silmarillion, it says his universe was created with a song. In a sense, Sam is tapping into the music of the universe and the music of creation. And what saves Frodo is a song that Frodo hears and answers back. That is how Sam finds him. So remember, of course, we all remember who saves Frodo at the Tower of Cirith Ungol. But how he does it is going to be through a song that he remembers. One of the important things about Sam, his perseverance is important. His steadfastness. He's not the most clever hobbit. He's not the most warrior-like, but he is loyal. And his memory is what saves him. In fact, he's kind of like the memory cells of the operation, and not in terms of like scientific type memory or even the lore of the elves, but Sam just loves the old songs. He remembers the songs, and those provide a link to the past. If you look through Lord of the Rings, there's at least a handful of times where Sam stands up and recites an old song. So I want to say, remember the old songs where we have been in this kind of darkness before. Not quite like this, and this is unlike those others in certain ways, but it is like those others in certain ways. The 1918 flu, we've had examples from that previously in these videos. SARS is exactly like this coronavirus. It's actually deadlier, but that caused it to self-destruct more quickly. SARS was contained. And so remember that those songs ended in a major key, on a happy note. The chords resolved. We're in the middle of a song right now, and we probably feel mostly like we're with Sam and Cirith Ungol, sitting down in the quiet and not knowing what to do. If you don't know what to do, then listen for the music and see what kind of song you can sing, even if it's a lament, even if you've lost significant someone or a significant job. There's a point at which we're to sit with Sam in the quietness and to start to sing the song that comes to you. Remember, it took weeks from even that point of Cirith Ungol, Frodo and Sam took weeks to complete their quest. If you want to know the exact days, you can look it up online because, of course, like everything online, you have an obsessive fan culture, and Tolkien made sure that his dates would work out because he wanted his story to be real. Another thing about the dates, though, this happened in a couple weeks, a week or two after this happened. Finally, Frodo got to the crack of doom and the Mount Doom. And Frodo did not ultimately choose to throw the ring in. Make sure that you don't fall into that misunderstanding. But his ring was taken from him by greed, and then it was destroyed. That day, when Sauron fell and the armies all collapsed, was the 25th of March. And Gandalf himself says it to Frodo, "In Gondor, the new year will always now begin upon the 25th of March, when Sauron fell, and when you were brought out of the fire to the king." That's how he describes it. And from then on, the new year always starts on March 25th. The reason why Tolkien did this, by the way, Tolkien was a lifelong Catholic, and his Christian faith led him to put the old date for Easter, which was March 25th, as the date when Middle-earth was redeemed and their calendar turned around. It's one of the few hints you can get from the whole Lord of the Rings. Tolkien knew that he couldn't really put Christianity into it because that would break the whole point of it being a different world from ours. He couldn't help this. He couldn't help putting the date of Easter being the date where things turned around. And so March 25th was Easter Day. And it was the day that things turned around. I also have a personal connection to March 25th. It was the day my second son, Aiden, was born. And so we didn't know at the time that it was the Gondorian New Year, the most important date in Lord of the Rings. But I was reminded of it today because one of my friends posted this on Facebook. It's Tolkien Reading Day. So if you're listening to this today, great. You read a little bit of Tolkien, and I've already taken care of that by reading that to you. And if you need an excuse to read more Tolkien, go ahead and let me know in your comments if you think you've read all of Tolkien and you're wondering what to read next. Because I've read a lot of Tolkien, and I kind of find new depths in him each time. With all the problems, there's problems with every author, right? With all the problems, Tolkien really does bring you new rewards every time you read. And so I just want to say one more thing. After this time, after Frodo and Sam are moving through Mordor, and of course there's clouds and a reek that is covering the heavens. They can't even see the light. And yet there's one point along their journey when Frodo's gone to sleep and Sam is looking up in the clouds, and he sees the brightest star he's ever seen peeking through the clouds, through one clear shaft in the clouds. Turns out that this star in Middle-earth is called Eärendil. There's a whole mythology behind why it's up there and why it's so bright. But Tolkien wanted this story to be real, remember? He wanted Middle-earth to be considered as a prehistory of sorts of our own world. And so he modeled Eärendil after the planet Venus. If you've ever wondered what Eärendil looks like, go outside and look up at the planet Venus. In fact, if you're able to see it tonight, and we don't have clouds in Seattle today, I might be able to see it myself. What you'll see is you'll see a planet that's so bright it looks like it's as bright as Jupiter. I saw it the other day when I was out for a walk, and I thought I had my sky wrong because it was so bright. I thought it was the brightest planet. But it turns out that it's so bright because of the way orbitals work and things like that. That's not the right word, but it's basically brighter now than it is for any time for 8 years. So get out and look at that, and you can call it Venus or you can call it Eärendil. And you can imagine Sam looking up and seeing this. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. His song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope, for then he was thinking of himself. Now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side, and putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. I don't know what kind of time you're going through right now. But I pray, if it's not tonight, then tomorrow or sometime soon, that you will be able to cast yourself into a similar sleep. And your anxieties to realize that the sun and Venus shine on above the clouds and above this current horror that we're living through in some places. Pray especially for the people in New York and Louisiana. Do everything you can to stop this. And if you're in a place that hasn't hit yet, be ready. Maybe it will turn out like Washington has so far. Maybe it will be worse. It can be worse, and we've seen that. But we do have the hope that the stars and the sun continuing to shine continue to give to us. And so I just pray that you'll have some measure of that peace as you go through this next day. In about a half a week, I will be back again with more data. Hopefully these trends will continue. Pray that they continue and work toward them continuing. Until then, may you be blessed, and may you find some part of the Lord of the Rings that you've never read before. All right.